On my wedding day, I stood at the altar of St. Mark's Cathedral in downtown Chicago, looking into the eyes of the man I'd spent 5 years loving, the man who'd promised me forever after holding me through the night my grandmother died. I watched him smile as he said, "Did you honestly think I could spend my life with someone from your world?" His mistress, Angela, my co-worker who'd helped me prepare for job interviews and told me I was destined for great things, emerged from the crowd of bridesmaids wearing an identical white gown, placed her hands on either side of James's face, and kissed him with such intensity that I felt something break inside my chest, a physical sensation so sharp I thought I might collapse right there on the marble floor. The pain wasn't just emotional anymore, it was in my bones, in my lungs, in the way my vision started to narrow and darken. I couldn't process how the two people who'd promised to protect me, who'd seen me at my most vulnerable, could construct my humiliation with this level of planning, this degree of cruelty, this obvious pleasure in my suffering. "We never intended to go through with this," James announced to the 400 guests seated in the cathedral, his voice bouncing off the stained glass windows depicting saints and angels who seemed to be witnessing my destruction. "You were a project, Naomi, a useful experiment, and now that experiment has reached its natural conclusion." His mother, Patricia, walked toward me with the bearing of someone passing judgment on a criminal, her designer heels echoing against the floor, and she grabbed my veil, my grandmother's veil, the only physical memory I had left of the woman who raised me after my parents' accident, and ripped it from my head so violently that I felt strands of my hair tear out with it. "You were so hungry for acceptance," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear every syllable, "that you never questioned why someone like my son would choose someone like you. That's what girls from the South Side do. They grasp at dreams because facing their reality would destroy them. But the moment that actually shattered me, that made my knees give out and my hands start trembling uncontrollably, was when Angela activated the slideshow. Our slideshow, the one James and I had created together to display our relationship journey during the reception. Except every photograph of me had been swapped out for images of them. Their first kiss was at my promotion dinner while I was outside taking a congratulatory call from my supervisor. Their weekend trips to Michigan and Wisconsin during my work conferences. Their bodies intertwined in the bed we shared in the apartment I'd been paying for because I wanted to help James save money while he built his career. And then Angela's voice, sweet and poisonous at the same time. "I'm 4 months pregnant, Naomi, with his child, the family he actually chose. You were just the warm-up, the practice run before the real thing." This channel is growing because of people who appreciate stories with depth and meaning. If this opening caught your attention, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below to let us know where you're watching from. We're grateful you're here. The cathedral filled with gasps, with whispers, with the kind of collective horror that feeds on watching another human being get torn apart in public. And I stood there, isolated and humiliated and destroyed, while James's father, Gerald, shoved legal papers into my hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Sign these documents," he ordered. "Every business recommendation you provided my son, every corporate restructuring analysis, every market prediction that saved our investment firm from collapse, all belong to Crawford Financial Group. Now you'll sign these forms, or we'll take you to court for fraud, for misrepresentation, for every dollar you've cost us by pretending you belonged in this family." My hand moved like it was disconnected from my body, signing away pieces of my identity because I was too broken to resist, too devastated to think clearly. And as my signature appeared on the final document, as Angela announced their engagement, as James's entire family raised their glasses to celebrate their victory over the gold-digging nobody who almost trapped their son, I felt a part of myself die, the part that believed in love, in loyalty, in the fundamental decency of people. But then, cutting through the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, through the ringing of betrayal and shame, through the death of everything I'd believed about my life and my worth, I heard something that made everyone freeze. The cathedral's massive wooden doors didn't just open. They exploded inward with a sound like thunder, like the building itself was splitting apart. And for a moment, time stopped. Breathing stopped. The celebration of my destruction stopped. Everything stopped. And then I saw him, my father, Jonathan Rivers, the man I hadn't seen in 5 years because I'd begged him to let me find genuine love without the complications of wealth and status. Walking down that center aisle with 14 men whose presence changed the atmosphere in the room, made the air feel electric and dangerous. And the expression on his face showed a rage so controlled, so cold, so absolutely lethal that even I felt a flicker of fear run down my spine. But what happened next made James's face lose all its color, made his mother stumble and grab the nearest pew for support, made his father Gerald drop to his knees like a man who'd just come face to face with his own mortality. My father stopped 15 feet from the altar. He looked at my torn veil lying on the floor. He looked at the mascara and tears streaking my face. He looked at the documents I'd just signed. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of empires crumbling, of fortunes disappearing, of lives being permanently altered. "Hello, sweetheart," he said to me, only to me, as if the 400 people and the family who'd orchestrated my destruction simply didn't exist. "I apologize for my timing. Should we show them who you really are?" And that's when Gerald Crawford started screaming. Actually screaming words like, "No, no, no, this isn't possible. She can't be. Jonathan, please, we didn't know. The contract. God, the contract." While James stood frozen at the altar with his mistress still in his arms, slowly beginning to understand that the mysterious Rivers daughter his father had ordered him to pursue and marry for a $15 billion business deal, the woman whose identity had been kept confidential for her protection, the woman whose father could erase their entire bloodline with a single decision, was standing directly in front of him wearing a torn wedding dress, holding documents that proved they'd stolen from her, carrying evidence of a betrayal so complete it would haunt him for the rest of his existence. My father's security team moved like shadows, forming a circle around the Crawford family that felt like a noose slowly tightening. And one of them, David, my father's head of security who'd taught me to swim when I was 8 years old, carefully took the documents from my trembling hands and held them up to the light, examining my forged signature with the kind of precision that made Gerald Crawford's face turn the color of ash. "These won't be legally binding," David said quietly, and something in his tone promised consequences that went far beyond litigation and courtrooms. My father stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same scent that had comforted me through panic attacks after my parents died in that car accident when I was 13, and he reached out to touch my face with such gentleness that my throat tightened, made 5 years of loneliness and pretending and trying to be ordinary crash over me like a wave I couldn't fight anymore. "Did they hurt you?" he asked, and the question was so simple, so direct, that I couldn't lie, couldn't be strong, couldn't do anything except nod as tears spilled down my cheeks and mixed with the mascara already staining my skin. His jaw tightened just slightly, and he turned to face James with an expression that made my husband, my ex-husband, I realized with a jolt, take 4 steps backward, nearly stumbling over Angela, who stood paralyzed in her white dress, one hand on her stomach, her face showing the first signs of real understanding about what she'd actually done, about who she'd actually destroyed. "You put your hands on my daughter," my father said, and his voice was still quiet, still controlled, but there was something underneath it that sounded like ice cracking, like foundations collapsing, like the kind of force that reshapes entire landscapes. "You humiliated her in front of hundreds of witnesses. You stole from her. You shattered her heart deliberately, systematically, as part of a calculated plan." "Mr. Rivers, please, I can explain," James started, but my father raised one hand, and the words died in James's throat like he'd been physically choked. "Explain what?" my father asked. "Explain how you pursued my daughter while pretending to be a struggling junior analyst? Explain how you used her genius to rescue your failing company while making her believe you valued her mind, not what it could produce for you? Explain how you planned this wedding day humiliation with your mistress, her co-worker, someone she trusted, while your family celebrated their victory over the nobody who almost trapped you?" He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped even lower, became even more terrifying in its calmness. "Or perhaps you would like to explain the contract you signed with me 8 months ago, the one where I offered your family a $15 billion investment deal in exchange for you pursuing a relationship with a mysterious daughter, whose identity I kept carefully hidden for her protection." The cathedral had gone so silent I could hear my own breathing, could listen to the rustle of fabric as guests leaned forward to catch every word, could listen to Angela's sharp intake of breath as she finally understood what James had actually done. "That's correct," my father continued, addressing the entire room now, his voice reaching every corner, every pew, every person who'd witnessed my destruction. 8 months ago, Gerald Crawford came to me desperate for a contract that would save his investment firm from bankruptcy. I agreed on one condition, that his son would court and marry a woman I would introduce to him, a woman whose business intelligence and strategic thinking could help transform Crawford Financial Group into something sustainable, something ethical. He paused. What Gerald didn't know, what James didn't know, was that the woman I was describing, the woman they agreed to pursue for business purposes, was already in their lives. He looked at James with something close to disgust. You were already engaged to her. You'd already been using her, stealing from her, betraying her. And when I realized that, when my investigation team discovered what you were really doing to my daughter, I modified the terms of our contract in ways your father never bothered to read carefully. Gerald Crawford was openly weeping now, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone and presumably tried to access the contract, tried to understand what he'd actually signed, what he'd actually agreed to. My father nodded to David, who produced a tablet and pulled up a document that made Gerald's face go from grey to white, made him drop his phone, made him start hyperventilating right there in the cathedral. The contract stipulates, my father said calmly, that if James Crawford married my daughter and then betrayed her in any way, infidelity, abuse, theft, public humiliation, I would have grounds to activate Clause 63, which transfers 51% controlling interest in Crawford Financial Group to me, along with immediate repayment of all contract advances, seizure of assets used in the commission of the betrayal, and personal liability for damages to be determined by independent arbitration. He paused, letting the words sink in, letting them understand the trap they'd walked into with their eyes wide open. You signed it, Gerald. You and your son. You agreed that my daughter deserved protection, respect, genuine partnership, and then you orchestrated her destruction on her wedding day. The room erupted in chaos, guests shouting, some rushing toward the exits, others pulling out phones to record what was happening, but I barely registered any of it because James was stumbling toward me now, his face showing the kind of panic that comes from watching your entire world collapse in real time. Naomi, please, I didn't know it was you. I swear I didn't know you were River's daughter. If you'd known I was wealthy, you would have treated me better. I heard my own voice, and it sounded strange, hollow, like it was coming from somewhere very far away. If you'd known my father could destroy you, you would have actually loved me. Is that what you're trying to say, James? He opened his mouth, closed it, and I saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him trying to find the right words, the right approach, the right strategy to salvage something from this disaster. And that's when I knew, really knew in a way I hadn't let myself know before, that he'd never loved me at all, not even a little bit, not even in the beginning. If you've ever felt underestimated because of where you came from, or judged before people knew your story, this is for you. Leave a comment telling us about a time someone underestimated you. We read every single one. I met you at that coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, I said, and my voice was getting stronger now, steadier, fueled by 5 years of suppressed truth. You approached me with lattes and charm and all those questions about economic theory. You made me feel seen, made me feel like my mind mattered, like intelligence was valuable to you. And I believed it, James. I believed every word because I was so desperate to be loved for myself, for Naomi, not for my last name or my father's money, or the empire I'd inherit. Tears were streaming down my face again, but I didn't wipe them away. My parents died when I was 13, killed in an accident caused by someone who wanted access to the river's fortune, and I promised my grandmother before she died that I'd find someone who loved me without knowing who I really was. So I became Naomi Williams. I earned a real scholarship, lived in a modest apartment on the South Side, wore normal clothes, and pretended I was ordinary. And you know what? It worked. You pursued me, except you didn't fall for me at all, did you? You fell for what I could give you. 5 years earlier, that coffee shop on Michigan Avenue had been nearly empty when James Crawford first sat down across from me with 2 lattes and a smile that made my stomach flip. I'd been studying corporate restructuring models, analyzing patterns that most undergraduates wouldn't touch until graduate school, and I'd been so absorbed in the data I was processing, the way failing companies all made the same 4 mistakes, the way market trends revealed themselves months before analysts noticed, that I hadn't heard him approach. "You're in my macroeconomics class," he'd said, and when I looked up, genuinely confused because I didn't remember him, he'd laughed and set one of the lattes on my table. "That's because you sit in the front row and actually pay attention while the rest of us try not to fall asleep. I'm James Crawford." I'd studied him for a moment, taking in the expensive watch he wore casually, the tailored jacket that suggested private schools and country clubs, the posture of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. I didn't ask for coffee, I'd said, but something in his expression, something that looked almost vulnerable, almost genuine, made me gesture to the chair across from me when he asked if he could sit. That first conversation became a second, then a third. Then suddenly he was part of my routine, showing up with with coffee that was always exactly how I liked it, which meant he'd been paying attention to details I hadn't realized I was revealing. We studied together, debated economic theory with the kind of passion that made other students stare, and slowly, carefully, I let myself believe that maybe this was real. Maybe this charming man, with the slight insecurity in his eyes when he talked about his family's firm, was someone who could see me, really see me, without the weight of the river's name, crushing everything genuine between us. He talked about Crawford Financial Group the way someone might talk about a childhood home that was falling apart, proud of what it had been, frustrated by what it was becoming. "We used to mean something in this city," he'd said one night, his hand finding mine across the study table. "Now we're just coasting on reputation while the market evolves past us. My father won't admit it, but we're dying slowly, and I don't know how to save us." And that's when I made my first mistake, the one that would eventually lead to this moment, to this cathedral, to this destruction. I offered to help, not as Naomi Rivers, daughter of Jonathan Rivers, whose investment strategies were studied in business schools, but as Naomi Williams, a scholarship student who just happened to have insights about market trends and restructuring models. "What if you diversified into sustainable investment portfolios?" I'd suggested casually, like it was just academic theory. "The market's shifting toward ESG compliance, and most of your competitors are years behind on infrastructure updates. You could position Crawford Financial Group as the premium ethical investment option before anyone else dominates that space." James had looked at me like I'd just solved a puzzle he'd been staring at for years, and the next day he'd asked if I'd be willing to look at some of his family's actual business models, just as a favor, just because my perspective was so unique and valuable. I'd said yes. I was falling in love with him, because helping him felt like a partnership, because I genuinely believed we were building something together. Over the next 8 months, I gave James everything, every strategy, every market analysis, every restructuring plan I could devise. And I watched Crawford Financial Group transform from a struggling legacy firm into something genuinely competitive. His father, Gerald, started looking at him with new respect and started including him in major decisions. And James would come back to me glowing with pride, saying, "You did this, Naomi. You're changing my life. Not our lives. My life." I'd noticed the phrasing even then, felt something cold flicker in my chest, but I'd pushed it away because when he kissed me outside my modest apartment building in a neighborhood that was safe but unmistakably working class, he looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. The first time I met his family, 11 months into our relationship, I knew immediately that I'd made a terrible mistake in believing love could exist without the complications of money, class, and power. His mother, Patricia, had opened the door of their mansion in Lake Forest, and it was a mansion, all stone columns and marble floors, and the kind of wealth that announced itself in whispers rather than shouts. And her eyes had swept over me in 3 seconds flat, calculating, measuring, finding me wanting. Dinner had been an interrogation, disguised as polite conversation. Every question is probing for weakness. Every comment is laced with the kind of condescension that comes from people who believe their bank accounts make them fundamentally superior to others. "So your grandmother worked in healthcare?" Gerald had said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. And I'd nodded, keeping my voice steady and appropriately humble, even though the truth was that my grandmother had owned 3 private hospitals in Illinois before she retired. "And you grew up on the South Side?" Again, I'd nodded, not mentioning that the modest background they assumed I came from was actually a carefully constructed performance designed to protect my heart from exactly this kind of predatory calculation. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the moment I'd left that dining room to use the restroom, the Crawford family had circled like sharks and made a decision that would shape the next 4 years of my life. James had argued for me, but not because he loved me, because I was useful. "She's brilliant," he told his family. And I knew this because Angela, my co-worker, my friend, the woman I'd trusted with my deepest fears and insecurities, had recorded the entire conversation on her phone and was now playing it for the cathedral full of guests, her voice narrating over the audio like she was proud of her betrayal. "She's an asset to Crawford Financial Group. With her intelligence, her analytical skills, and her ability to predict market trends, we could dominate our sector. This isn't about love or status. This is about what she can do for our company, for our family's future." His mother's voice had responded. She'd work for the company. And James's answer, clear as crystal, devastating as a blade. "Her skills, her strategies, everything. Think of it as an acquisition. We're not just getting a wife. We're getting a competitive advantage." The audio played through the cathedral sound system. And I watched James's face crumble as he realized what Angela had done, how she'd documented everything, how she'd kept evidence of his betrayal like trophies she was finally ready to display. But the recording wasn't finished. It continued to a conversation from 8 months ago, a conversation I'd known nothing about, where Gerald Crawford met with my father, Jonathan Rivers, and agreed to a contract that would save their company in exchange for James pursuing a relationship with Rivers's mysterious daughter. My father's voice was calm, professional, giving nothing away. My daughter is 28, brilliant, accomplished, but sheltered due to her position. She's expressed interest in meeting your son, in pursuing a relationship if they're compatible. And Gerald's response was eager and desperate. What exactly are the terms? My father had outlined them carefully, every word a trap disguised as opportunity. A $15 billion investment deal over 7 years, contingent on James giving my daughter a genuine chance at a relationship, treating her with respect, building something real and lasting. But then the recording jumped forward to 4 months ago, to a conversation between James and Angela in what sounded like a hotel room, their voices intimate and conspiratorial. "Do you think your father actually believes you're going to marry Rivers' daughter?" Angela had asked, and James had laughed, actually laughed before responding. "He's desperate enough to believe anything. The contract is already signed. The first $3 billion have already transferred. As long as I go through the motions with Naomi until the wedding, keep her thinking she's special, keep extracting those strategies that have basically rebuilt our entire company, we're golden. After the wedding, after we've legally locked in her intellectual property as marital assets, we can do whatever we want. I'll divorce her quietly, marry you, and my father can handle Rivers' daughter however he wants." Angela's voice had turned playful. "And the baby?" James's response was cold, calculated. "Makes the timeline perfect. We announce your pregnancy right after the wedding, humiliate Naomi publicly so she doesn't fight the divorce, and we frame it as her being unstable, unfit, a gold digger who couldn't handle the reality of our family. Rivers will be furious, but the contract's already fulfilled. I gave his daughter a chance. It just didn't work out." The recording ended, and the silence in the cathedral was absolute, broken only by Angela's voice, her real voice, live and present, saying from the altar where she still stood in her white dress, "Except I'm not actually pregnant. I lied about that too. I just wanted to see Naomi's face when she thought she'd lost everything." She smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen on another human being. "You were so easy to fool, Naomi. So desperate to believe someone could love you. Did you really think a man like James would choose you if he knew better options existed? You were never going to be enough. No matter how smart you were, no matter how much you gave him, you were always just the girl who was useful until she wasn't." And that's when something inside me shifted, moved from broken devastation into something harder, colder, something that felt almost like relief. Because at least now I knew the truth. At least now I could stop wondering what I'd done wrong. Stop blaming myself for not being lovable enough. Stop carrying the weight of a failure that had never actually been mine. Think about the people in your life who see your true value, the ones who don't need to know your bank account to respect you. If this story is reminding you to appreciate those people, share this video with them, and tell us in the comments about someone who valued you for who you are, not what you have. My father's hand was still on my shoulder, steady and solid, and when I looked up at him, I saw that his expression hadn't changed. He'd known all of this, had known it for months, had been waiting for this exact moment to reveal everything. "You knew," I whispered, and it wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I hired investigators the week after you told me about him," my father admitted quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "They discovered the family meeting where they decided to use you within 48 hours. They uncovered Angela's role within a week, and when Gerald Crawford came to me 8 months ago, desperate for that contract, I saw an opportunity to protect you in a way that would give you undeniable proof of who these people really were." He paused, and something painful flickered across his face. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry I let it go this far. I thought if I gave you evidence, documentation, and legal protection, you'd leave him before the wedding. But you loved him, and love makes us believe in impossibilities, and I couldn't." His voice cracked slightly. "I couldn't force you to see what you weren't ready to see, so I waited. And I made sure that when you finally did see it, when they finally showed you who they really were, I'd be here to catch you." James was on his knees now, not in a romantic proposal, but in complete collapse, his hands clasped together like he was praying to a god who'd already turned away. "Please, Mr. Rivers, please. I'll do anything. I'll fix this. Just don't take the company. Don't destroy my family. I'll make this right. But my father wasn't looking at James anymore. He was looking at Gerald Crawford, who stood near the front pew with his phone in his shaking hands, staring at the contract terms he'd apparently never read carefully, at the clauses that were now activated, at the financial destruction that was already in motion. You signed away your company the moment your son humiliated my daughter, my father said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute finality. Clause 63 activated the instant he publicly betrayed her. Your assets are frozen. Your accounts are being audited by federal investigators who've been very interested in some creative accounting practices my team discovered. And the board of Crawford Financial Group will receive notice within the hour that I now control 51% of the company, and you're all terminated effective immediately. Patricia Crawford, who'd torn my grandmother's veil from my hair, who'd whispered that I was pathetic and desperate, stumbled backward and grabbed her husband's arm, her face showing the first real emotion I'd ever seen from her, pure, unadulterated terror. "You can't do this," she gasped. "We have lawyers. We have connections. We'll fight this in court for years." "You're welcome to try," my father said calmly. "But you should know that every judge in Cook County has either worked with Rivers Global Investments or wants to. Every lawyer you might hire has either been on my payroll or hopes to be. And every piece of evidence documenting your family's fraud, theft, and conspiracy is already in the hands of authorities who've been waiting for an ironclad case against families exactly like yours." He turned slightly, addressing the remaining guests who sat frozen in their pews, phones out, recording everything. "Let this be a lesson about what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, when you assume someone's worth is tied to their bank account, when you decide that another human being exists solely for your benefit." Angela finally moved. Finally tried to run, her white dress tangling around her legs as she stumbled toward the side exit. But two of my father's security team were already there, blocking her path with expressions that promised there was nowhere left to hide. "Miss Taylor," my father said, and Angela froze at the sound of her full name spoken with such authority. "You recorded those conversations, which means you were party to conspiracy, fraud, and theft of intellectual property. The documents you helped James forge, the strategies you helped him steal from my daughter while pretending to be her friend, the systematic emotional abuse you participated in, all of it is criminal. All of it is documented, and all of it will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Angela's face went white, then red, then white again, and she turned to James, as he might save her. But James was still on his knees, still staring at the floor, already understanding that there was no salvation coming. Not for him, not for anyone who'd participated in this betrayal. My father's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it briefly before nodding to David, who stepped forward and addressed the cathedral with calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, federal investigators are arriving to secure evidence and conduct interviews. If you witnessed the events of this wedding, you'll be asked to provide statements. If you have video or photographic evidence, it will be collected as part of the investigation. No one is under arrest at this time, but I strongly suggest the Crawford family and Miss Taylor retain legal counsel immediately." The words hung in the air like a sentence, and I watched as the reality of consequences, real legal life-destroying consequences, settled over the people who'd spent the last hour celebrating my humiliation. Some guests were already leaving, practically running for the exits, while others stayed rooted in place, their phones still recording, still documenting what would probably become the most viral wedding disaster in Chicago history. And through all of it, through the chaos and the fear and the complete unraveling of everything James and his family had built, I felt something unexpected rising in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, not revenge or triumph, but something quieter and more powerful. Freedom. The freedom of knowing I'd been right to trust my instincts, right to value genuine connection over convenient lies, right to believe that love should be about partnership rather than exploitation. They hadn't broken me, they'd revealed themselves, and in doing so, they'd given me back something I'd been afraid to claim, the certainty that I deserved better, that being vulnerable wasn't a weakness, that offering my heart to the wrong person didn't mean my heart was worthless. It meant I'd been brave enough to try, honest enough to give everything, strong enough to survive when everything was taken. My father squeezed my shoulder gently, and when I looked up at him, I saw tears in his eyes, the first tears I'd seen since my grandmother's funeral. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, and I knew he wasn't talking about my business strategies or my intelligence or my ability to survive public humiliation. He was proud that I'd tried to love authentically, that I'd honored my grandmother's memory by refusing to let wealth define me, that I'd stood at this altar, broken but not destroyed, hurt but not defeated. 4 weeks later, I stood in the boardroom of Rivers Global Investments in downtown Chicago for the first time in 5 years, and Lake Michigan stretched behind me like a promise I'd forgotten I was allowed to claim. My father sat at the head of the massive table, surrounded by lawyers, executives, and the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself because everyone in the room could feel it humming in the air like electricity. The Crawford Financial Group case had moved faster than anyone expected, propelled by evidence so overwhelming that even the most expensive lawyers couldn't fabricate reasonable doubt. James faced federal charges for intellectual property theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Angela had already accepted a plea deal that would put her in prison for 22 months. Gerald and Patricia Crawford were bankrupt, their Lake Forest mansion seized, their social circle evaporated overnight because nothing makes wealthy people disappear faster than the threat of association with scandal and federal investigation. But I wasn't here to watch their destruction continue. I was here because my father had called this meeting specifically for me, had gathered these people for a reason he hadn't yet explained. And when he stood and gestured for me to take his seat at the head of the table, I felt my heart start racing with something that felt almost like hope. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father said, his voice carrying that quiet authority that made billion-dollar deals and broke corporate empires. "I'd like to introduce you to Naomi Elizabeth Rivers, my daughter, and as of today, the Chief Strategy Officer of Rivers Global Investments." The room erupted in applause, and I saw faces I recognized from business magazines, from news articles, from the kind of financial circles that shaped markets and economies. And they were standing up, clapping for me, not for my father's daughter, but for the woman whose strategies had transformed a failing company in 20 months, whose market analyses had been studied by investigators as examples of genius-level corporate restructuring. My father placed a folder in front of me, and when I opened it, I saw the Crawford Financial Group logo at the top of the first page. "We now own 51% controlling interest," he explained, "which means we get to decide what happens to the company, to its assets, to its future." He paused, and something in his expression told me this moment was a test, a question, a choice he was giving me about what kind of person I wanted to become in the aftermath of betrayal. "I want you to decide, Naomi. Do we liquidate and destroy it completely? Do we restructure and sell it? Or do we keep it and transform it into something better than it ever was under the Crawfords?" The room went silent, waiting, and I felt the weight of that choice settle over my shoulders like a mantle I'd been preparing to wear my entire life without realizing it. I thought about James on his knees, begging for mercy he didn't deserve. I thought about Patricia's cruelty, Gerald's greed, and Angela's calculated betrayal. I thought about how easy it would be to destroy everything they'd built, to salt the earth where their legacy had stood, to make sure the Crawford name became synonymous with cautionary tales about hubris and consequence. But then I thought about the 963 employees who worked for Crawford Financial Group, people who hadn't participated in my humiliation, who had families and mortgages and dreams that shouldn't be collateral damage in someone else's war. I thought about my grandmother, who taught me that real power wasn't about crushing your enemies, but about building something so good, so strong, so transformative that your enemies became irrelevant in comparison. We've reached a turning point in Naomi's story. Before we see what she decides, we want to ask you something. What would you do in her position? Would you destroy the company completely or transform it into something better? Comment below with your answer. We want to hear your perspective. "We keep it," I said, and my voice didn't shake, didn't hesitate. "We restructure it completely, implement every strategy I designed, and we make it the most successful ethical investment firm in the Midwest. We offer the current employees retention bonuses and profit sharing. We turn it into proof that brilliance and ethics can coexist, that you don't have to exploit people to build something extraordinary." My father smiled, and it was the proudest expression I'd ever seen on his face. "That's my girl," he said quietly, and then, louder to the room, "You heard her. Make it happen." The meeting continued for another hour, plans forming, strategies deploying, the machinery of transformation beginning to turn, and I sat in that chair at the head of the table and felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years, completely authentically myself, not Naomi Williams, the ordinary scholarship student, not the girl desperate to be loved without the weight of her name, just Naomi Rivers, a woman who'd survived betrayal and chosen to build rather than destroy, who'd been broken open and discovered that the breaking had revealed something stronger than what she'd been protecting. That evening, I returned to my apartment, my real apartment, the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan that my father had kept maintained during my 5-year experiment with ordinary life, and I found a package waiting with my father's handwriting on the label. Inside was my grandmother's veil, professionally restored, every tear mended, every stain removed, and a note in his familiar script. "Some things can be repaired. Some things can be made even more beautiful because of what they survived. I love you, sweetheart. Welcome home." I held that veil against my chest and cried, but this time, The tears weren't from pain or humiliation or betrayal. They were from relief, from gratitude, from the bone-deep understanding that I'd lost someone who wasn't worth keeping and gained back myself in the process. 6 months passed, like pages turning in a book I was finally writing for myself instead of reading from someone else's script. Crawford Financial Group, now operating under new leadership and renamed Horizon Ethical Investments, had become the fastest-growing firm in the Midwest. Every employee who'd stayed received stock options. Every strategy I'd once given away freely was now implemented with my name attached, with credit given, with the kind of recognition that comes from owning your brilliance instead of hiding it to make someone else comfortable. James's trial had been swift and decisive. 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation and a permanent ban from working in financial services. Angela served her time in a minimum security facility, her career in ruins, her reputation destroyed. Gerald and Patricia. Crawford had moved to a modest condo in Springfield, their wealth evaporated, their social standing demolished, their legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about what happens when greed masquerades as strategy. But I wasn't tracking their downfall anymore, wasn't checking news articles, court documents, or updates from my father's legal team, because I'd discovered something more powerful than revenge, more satisfying than watching someone else suffer. I'd discovered the freedom that comes from building something meaningful, from using my gifts without apology, from loving myself enough to never again diminish my worth for someone else's comfort. I was walking through Millennium Park on a Saturday afternoon, the Chicago skyline rising behind me like a promise finally fulfilled, when I saw him, a man about my age, sitting on a bench with a sketchbook, so absorbed in whatever he was drawing that he didn't notice me approaching. And something about the way he held his pencil, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way he seemed completely present in his creative process, made me stop. "That's beautiful," I said, gesturing to his sketch of the Cloud Gate sculpture. And when he looked up, I saw eyes that held curiosity without calculation, interest without agenda. "Thank you," he said, and his smile was genuine, uncomplicated. "I'm trying to capture the way the light reflects differently depending on the angle, but I keep getting it wrong. Maybe that's the point," I heard myself say. "Maybe it's supposed to look different from every perspective. That's what makes it interesting." He considered this, then laughed. "I like that. Multiple truths exist simultaneously." He extended his hand. "I'm Andre." "Naomi," I said, shaking his hand, and feeling something warm and unexpected flutter in my chest. Not the desperate, hungry feeling I'd had with James, but something calmer, more grounded, like recognizing something valuable without needing to possess it, without needing to prove anything. We talked for an hour about art and economics, about growing up in Chicago, about the ways people sometimes hide the most interesting parts of themselves because they're afraid of judgment. And when he asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime, I said yes. Not because I was trying to prove I'd moved on, not because I was lonely or desperate or trying to fill a void, but because I wanted to. Because he seemed kind and genuine and curious about the world in a way that felt refreshing after years of strategic conversations designed to extract value. "I should probably tell you something," I said before we parted ways. "I'm not great at pretending to be someone I'm not anymore. I tried that once, and it didn't end well." Andre smiled. "Good. I'm not interested in who you're pretending to be. I'm interested in who you actually are." And something about the simplicity of that statement, the directness of it, made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could try again. Could open my heart without armor, could be vulnerable without being foolish, could love someone while still loving myself. We're near the end of Naomi's journey, and we want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between revenge and rebuilding? Between destroying someone who hurt you and creating something better? Your story matters. Share it in the comments below. 3 months later, I sat across from Andre at a small restaurant in Bronzeville, telling him the truth. All of it. The wedding, the betrayal, the revelation, the choice I'd made to transform instead of destroy. And as I spoke, watching his face for signs of judgment or calculation or the kind of predatory interest that comes from people who see wealth as opportunity, I saw only compassion, only understanding, only the genuine concern of someone who cared about my pain without trying to use it for their advantage. "That's why you asked me what I do for a living on our first date," he said quietly. "You wanted to see if I'd treat you differently once I knew. And you didn't," I said, remembering how he'd simply nodded when I told him I worked in investments, hadn't pressed for details, hadn't tried to impress me with connections or knowledge. "You talked about your mural project for the next 30 minutes instead." "Because your job isn't who you are," Andre said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "It's what you do. And I'm interested in why you do it, what it means to you, how it fits into the life you're building, not what it can do for me." I felt tears prick my eyes. But they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that comes from being seen, really seen by someone who isn't trying to use your visibility for their benefit. I'm scared, I admitted. I'm scared of trusting again, of believing someone means what they say, of opening my heart and discovering it was all a performance. I know, Andre said, and I'm not going to tell you not to be scared, because that would be dishonest. What I will tell you is this: I'm going to show up consistently, honestly, without an agenda, and you can take all the time you need to believe it's real, because I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in 6 years, I felt my heart settle into something that felt like home. Not because Andre was perfect, not because he was wealthy or connected or positioned to advance my career, but because he was genuine, because he saw me as a whole person, not a collection of assets to be acquired, because he understood that love isn't about what someone can give you, but about who you become when you're together. A year later, I stood in a small garden in Oak Park, surrounded by 30 people who actually mattered to me, not 400 guests assembled for show, not business contacts or social obligations, but genuine friends, family, and colleagues who'd proven their loyalty through actions, not words. My father walked me down an aisle of wildflowers, and when he placed my hand in Andre's, he whispered, "This one's real, sweetheart. I can tell." And it was real. The vows we exchanged were written together over weeks of honest conversation. The promises we made, not to complete each other, but to support each other's completeness. The future we envisioned was built on mutual respect and genuine partnership instead of strategic advantage. When Andre lifted my veil, my grandmother's veil, restored and beautiful and symbolic of everything that can be repaired when handled with care, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I see you, Naomi, all of you, and I'm honored to be seen by you." And I believed him, not because I was desperate or naive or trying to prove something, but because he'd spent a year showing me, through consistent actions and honest communication, that his words matched his intentions, that his love was freely given, not strategically deployed. The reception was simple: good food, better music, and the kind of joy that comes from celebrating something genuine with people who actually care. No slideshow of manufactured moments, no speeches designed to impress strangers, just dancing and laughter, and the warm contentment of knowing I'd finally found what I'd been searching for all along. Not someone to complete me, but someone to walk beside me. Not someone to save me, but someone to witness my journey and share their own. My father gave a toast that made everyone cry. When Naomi was 13 and lost her parents, I promised myself I'd protect her from every harm, every pain, every disappointment. But I've learned that protection isn't about preventing all suffering. It's about giving someone the tools and support they need to survive suffering and become stronger because of it. My daughter didn't need me to save her from James Crawford. She needed me to believe in her strength, to provide evidence when she was ready to see it, and to catch her when she was ready to fall. And watching her transform that experience into wisdom, into compassion, into the kind of leadership that builds instead of destroys, has been the greatest honor of my life. Andre's toast was simpler, but just as powerful. Naomi taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about showing up every day with honesty and consistency. It's about seeing someone's full humanity and choosing to honor it. It's about building trust through actions, not words. And I promise every single day for the rest of our lives to show up for her the way she deserves. As we danced our first dance to a song Andre had chosen because it reminded him of the day we met in Millennium Park, I looked around at the faces of people who'd proven their loyalty, who'd supported my healing, who'd celebrated my transformation. And I felt something I'd thought I'd lost forever in that cathedral in Chicago. Hope, not the desperate, clinging hope of someone trying to force a fairy tale into existence, but the grounded, steady hope of someone who'd survived the worst and discovered she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. We're coming to the end of this story, but before we do, we have a question for you. This channel exists because of people like you, people who believe in stories with meaning, who understand that our struggles don't define us, but our responses to them do. If Naomi's journey resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or gave you hope for your own healing, do 3 things. First, hit the subscribe button so you never miss stories that matter. Second, like this video to help us reach others who might need to hear this message. And third, share your own story in the comments. Tell us about a time you chose rebuilding over revenge, about someone who saw your true value, about a moment when you discovered your own strength. We read every comment, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. 6 months after my wedding to Andre, I received a letter. It was forwarded through my father's legal team, marked from a correctional facility in downstate Illinois. From James. I almost threw it away without reading it, almost decided that giving him even a moment of my attention was more than he deserved. But something, curiosity maybe, or the need for closure I didn't know I still wanted, made me open it. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten and filled with the kind of remorse that comes from genuine consequences finally penetrating years of entitlement and manipulation. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify what he'd done or minimize the harm he'd caused. He simply acknowledged the truth, that he'd used me, betrayed me, destroyed me deliberately and without conscience, that he'd spent every day of his incarceration understanding, truly understanding, what he'd thrown away. Not my money, my father's influence, or my business strategies, but me, the person who'd loved him genuinely, who'd given him everything, without condition, who'd believed in the best version of him even when he was actively working to destroy her. "I know this doesn't change anything," he wrote in the final paragraph. "I know I can never undo the harm I caused or earn your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that you were right about everything, about what real love should look like, about the difference between partnership and exploitation, about the value of treating people with genuine respect, regardless of what they can give you. I hope wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you've found someone who deserves you, someone who sees your brilliance and your kindness and your strength and honors all of it, because that's what you always deserved. And I'm sorry I was too broken and selfish to give it to you." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened, not because I was holding on to the pain or the betrayal or the hope that he might change, but it was evidence of something important, that people could grow, could recognize their failures, could sit with the consequences of their actions, and emerge with genuine understanding. It didn't erase what he'd done, didn't make me forgive him or want him back or regret the choices I'd made, but it did give me something valuable, the knowledge that my faith in human potential, in the possibility of genuine connection and authentic love, hadn't been naive or foolish. It had been offered to the wrong person at the wrong time. But that didn't make it worthless. It made it precious. I never responded to James's letter, never visited him, sent forgiveness, or offered closure, because I didn't owe him anything. Not my time, not my energy, not the emotional labor of helping him feel better about what he'd done. My healing wasn't about him. It was about me. About choosing every single day to build a life that honored my worth, that celebrated my strength, that surrounded me with people who saw my full humanity and treasured it. Today, 3 years after that wedding day in the Cathedral, I run the fastest growing ethical investment firm in the country. Horizon Ethical Investments has offices in 6 cities and a reputation for brilliant strategy combined with genuine integrity. Every employee has equity in the company. Every client knows their investments align with their values, and every decision we make is guided by a simple principle that I learned the hard way. People aren't assets to be acquired. They're complex, valuable, irreplaceable individuals who deserve to be seen, respected, and honored. My relationship with Andre continues to be the healthiest, most genuine partnership I've ever experienced. We challenge each other, support each other, and celebrate each other's successes without competition or resentment. We've built a life in Chicago that feels authentic and purposeful, filled with art and music and meaningful work and deep friendships. And on the days when old wounds try to resurface, when I find myself questioning people's motives or protecting my heart out of habit rather than necessity, he reminds me gently that not everyone is James, that I survived the worst and discovered my strength, that being open to love is always braver than hiding behind walls. My father and I have never been closer. He stepped back from day-to-day operations of Rivers Global Investments, trusting my team to carry forward the legacy he built while creating something new and distinctly ours. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when we have dinner together, he'll look at me with tears in his eyes and say, "Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become, not despite what happened to you, but because of how you chose to respond to it." And he's right. I am stronger because I survived betrayal, wiser because I learned to distinguish genuine connection from strategic manipulation, more compassionate because I understand how easy it is to mistake performance for authenticity when you're desperate to be loved, and more certain of my worth because I discovered it doesn't come from someone else's validation. It comes from knowing myself, honoring my values, and choosing every day to build a life that reflects my truth. The scars are still there, probably always will be. There are moments when someone's compliment feels suspicious, when generosity seems transactional, when I have to consciously remind myself that not everyone has hidden agendas. But those moments are becoming fewer, farther between, replaced by growing confidence in my ability to discern truth from manipulation, genuine care from strategic positioning. And sometimes when I'm working late in my office overlooking Lake Michigan, I think about that girl who stood at the altar in a torn wedding dress, surrounded by people celebrating her destruction. And I send her love. I thank her for being brave enough to love fully, even when it ended in devastation. I honor her for surviving what felt like the end of everything. I celebrate her for choosing transformation over revenge, for building instead of destroying, for believing that her story wasn't over just because one chapter ended in flames. Because that's the truth they don't tell you about betrayal. It doesn't have to define you. It can refine you. It can burn away everything false and leave behind something pure and strong and absolutely unbreakable. It can teach you that your worth isn't determined by whether someone chooses to see it, that love isn't about changing yourself to be acceptable to someone else, that the right person will celebrate your fullness, not demand your diminishment. James Crawford taught me what love isn't. Andre taught me what it is. My father taught me that protection sometimes looks like letting someone fall and being there to catch them. And I taught myself that I'm strong enough to survive anything, brave enough to try again, and wise enough to know the difference between genuine connection and beautiful lies. As we close this story, we want to leave you with something, a reminder that your worth isn't determined by how someone else treated you, that surviving betrayal makes you stronger, not broken. Choosing to build something beautiful after destruction is the ultimate form of victory. If this story touched you, if it gave you hope or strength, or reminded you of your own resilience, we'd be honored if you'd share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment telling us what part of Naomi's journey resonated most with you. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing stories that matter, stories that remind us all of our shared humanity and incredible strength. And most importantly, remember that your story isn't over. No matter what you've survived, no matter how devastating the betrayal or how complete the destruction, you have the power to write the next chapter, to choose transformation over revenge, to build something extraordinary from the ashes of what was destroyed. We're grateful you spent this time with us today. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember that you are seen, you are valued, and you are so much stronger than you know.